Hello and good morning, students. Today we will be starting with another chapter, that is Mahatma Gandhi and the nationalist movement, especially focusing on the civil disobedience and beyond. So before starting the chapter, I would like to explain or define what do you mean by nationalism. So nationalism, in simple words, it means feeling of oneness, love, loyalty towards its nation, right? It's the feeling of oneness, love, loyalty, devotion towards its nation. So that is called nationalism. So if you move on to the history of nationalism, it is always influenced by a single individual. Like for example, Garibaldi with the making of Italy. Number two is George Washington. He also aroused the feeling of nationalism with the American War of Independence, and Ho Chi Minh with the struggle of free Vietnam. Okay, please remember these three names: Garibaldi from Italy, George Washington with the American War of Independence, and Ho Chi Minh with the struggle to free Vietnam from colonial rule. Okay, so in the same way, Mahatma Gandhi has been regarded as the father of Indian nation, and he is very important in our nation because he was the one to arouse the feeling of nationalism in India. Okay, like Garibaldi, George Washington, and Ho Chi Minh, Mahatma Gandhi was the one to arouse the feeling of nationalism, oneness in India. So that is why he is important.
Okay, so Gandhiji was one of the most influential and revered leaders who participated in the freedom struggle. So this means that he was one of the most influential and most respected leaders. Okay, so in this chapter we will be studying about the crucial struggle of Gandhiji between the time period of 1915 to 1948, and we will be studying why is he important and how did he became so powerful and how did he spread the feeling of nationalism in India. So basically we will be studying about that in this chapter, and also the freedom movements started and led by Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, students, so let us start with the first subtopic, that is a leader announces himself. As we all know, Gandhiji's full name is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and he spent his 20 years in South Africa as a lawyer, where he became the leader of the Indian community. Okay, in South Africa, he went as a lawyer and he became the leader of the Indian community over there, and he returned to India in January 1915. Okay, he returned to India in January 1915. But as described by Chandran Devanasan, so what he remarked was that South Africa was the making of Mahatma. Okay, so what this meant was that in South Africa, Gandhiji was one of the most respected leaders at that time, and in South Africa he lodged and practiced his non-violent protest of satyagraha. Okay, he practiced his non-violent protest of satyagraha in South Africa, where he promoted harmony between the religions and also highlighted the discriminatory treatments of the upper caste Indians towards the low caste and the women. Okay, so Gandhiji came back to India in 1915. So what he found out at that time was that when he left India in 1893 and when he came back in 1915, the whole environment was changed. So what he found out was that the environment was politically active. Okay, India was more politically active at that time. Like for example, number one was National Congress now had more branches in major cities and towns. Okay, National Indian National Congress, they had more branches in most of the major cities and towns. And number two was Swadeshi movement had gained more popularity among the middle class people, right? And also there was this emergence of leaders whose name was Bal Gangadhar Tilak of Maharashtra, Bipin Chandra Pal of Bengal, and Lala Lajpat Rai of Punjab, who were also known as the three trios, also known as Lal Bal Pal. So what they believed was they believed and advocated militant opposition to colonial rule. Okay, so they were also known as the extremists, and there was this another group who was known as the moderates, who preferred a more gradual and persuasive approach. So what they did was they filed petitions. So they usually followed a more peaceful approach rather than the extremists. So in the moderates, there were this leaders like Gopal Krishna Gokhale as well as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who, like Gandhiji, was a lawyer from Gujarat. Okay, they were also trained in London. So Gokhale advised Gandhiji to spend a year traveling around British India in order to know the land and its people nicely and properly. So what Gokhale suggested Gandhiji to is to was to travel India and to know the culture, the diversity, okay, and also the living conditions of the people. In order to see that, Gokhale advised Gandhiji to travel to India. And Gandhiji's first major appearance was at the opening of Banaras Hindu University. This is very important. This might come in your exams. So his first major appearance was at Banaras Hindu University, opening of the Banaras Hindu University in February 1960s. And at that time, there were many dignitaries who were invited. Among them were the princes and the philanthropists. You know who are princes, but philanthropists are people who help the society by donating and by donations. So sometimes they are also known as the civil society, right? So philanthropists are people who help society by donating and by also doing some social works. So these people are known as philanthropists. And at that function, many political leaders of Indian National Congress was also present. Like for example, Annie Besant was also present at that time. So Gandhiji at that time, people didn't know who Gandhiji was. He was relatively unknown. Okay, he was just invited at that event just because of his work in South Africa, his work of satyagraha and non-violent protests. So Gandhiji was just being called in that event for that. So in that event, Gandhiji was also allowed to speak, and when his turn came to speak, what he did was he charged the Indian elites, who were the rich people, saying that they did not have any concern, any sympathy, any kindness towards the laboring poor. He said that the opening of the Banaras Hindu University was a gorgeous show, but what he could see in that event was just the rich people and the rich noblemen or the rich elite people. But what he could not see in that event was millions of poor and millions of poor Indians who were absent in that event. So that was there. The opening of the Banaras Hindu University was an occasion of celebration because it was the opening of the nationalist university, which was being sustained by the rich people, okay, rich Indian people, and also because of the Indian initiative. So it was meant to be an occasion for celebration. But in that event, what Gandhiji chose was to remind those present in that event that the poor peasants and the workers, who constituted a majority of the Indian population, they were unrepresented in the audience. Okay, so what he meant by this was, in that event was only for the betterment and the benefit of the rich elite people, and he could not see any working class people and peasants and poor people in that event. So what he said was the peasants and the workers were unrepresented in the audience. So after that, so Gandhiji's speech at Banaras in February 1916 was one level merely a statement of fact. What he was able to show was Indian nationalism was just an elite phenomenon. Indian nationalism was just for the rich people, okay, and it was benefiting only the rich people. The majority of the people, okay, the majority of the people who were like poor working class, poor peasants, they were unrepresented, and what he wanted was to include all those unrepresented people in the arena of Indian nationalism. So this was his idea. And because of this, Gandhiji was presented with an opportunity to put his ideas into practice. Okay, in the annual Congress meeting Held in Lucknow in December 1916, he was approached by a peasant from Champaran. Okay, he was approached by a peasant in Champaran in Bihar, and that peasant complained about the harsh treatment that they were facing from the British indigo planters. Okay, he complained that they were facing harsh treatment, okay, from or given by the British indigo planters.